Can everybody help me in welcoming Julia to the stage? All right.
Okay, I guess I'm taking it from here.
Sorry.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. Welcome to everybody. Yes, I'm Julia Hamm. Just by way of background, for those of you who I don't know, I run a nonprofit called the Smart Electric Power Alliance, or SEPA. We've been around for 25 years as a 501c3, serving as a neutral, unbiased party, working really sitting between the traditional electric utility industry and companies, government agencies, and others that are working towards helping us evolve to a clean and modern grid. So we operate under a membership model. We have about 1,100 companies that are members, of which about half are electric utilities, and the others are the broad suite of stakeholders interested in working with the electric utility industry on this transition. So I'm very excited to kick off the conference here, and first I'm going to be having a conversation with Gary High, who's the SVP of Marketing and Product Development at Landis+Gyr, and then I'll be bringing up two other folks, and we'll be continuing the conversation. So Gary, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here. Nice to see a lot of familiar faces. I think I was actually at the first one of these about 5 years ago. It was down the road a little bit, and it's always an interesting event.
Awesome. So help people understand Landis+Gyr. Just quickly, 60 seconds. What's the elevator pitch? Who are you? What do you do?
So Landis+Gyr has been around for over 120 years. But more recently, our history is we went public last year. We were a publicly traded Swiss company at this point. We're the market leader in AMI, which is, we're also known for meters, but we do the communication systems and the metering systems that go along with that. We do that globally, and we have got projects as large as the Tokyo Electric Power, which is about 27 million, all the way to a lot of the co-ops and munis here in Texas. And so we do that, and we provide the software and the services that go along with that.
Right. So the company's been around 120 years. You founded it, right?
Oh, I did. I was there day one.
So obviously that's great, right? Because we often talk about the utility industry having been around for 100 years plus. So there are also companies in the industry that have been supporting the utility industry for as long as it's been around. But so talk to us about the biggest changes. This kickoff here, first couple of sessions, is really focusing on the customer. So I'm curious, in terms of thinking about the end-use customer, what would you say some of the biggest changes are that you've seen in the desires of customers over the past, let's say, 5 years?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Any of us that have been in the industry for a while have seen the evolution. If you just think about how we interact with the organizations we deal with, whether it's Amazon or Comcast or your phone company, you know, and what we expect out of those organizations. The same things applying to our customers who, you know, as an industry used to kind of think of as ratepayers. They're really not ratepayers anymore. They are consumers, and they expect a level of interaction that would equate to all those other organizations that we all deal with on a daily basis via our smartphone now. And just the impact of that on this industry over the last 5 years has been tremendous. And I think it really kind of sets our sights on an event like this of what we need to be talking about and be thinking about as far as how do we interact with those consumers and deliver value.
Mm-hmm. So that's from an end consumer perspective, but your customers are typically utilities. So what does that mean for your customers, the utilities? How have you seen your customers shift their behaviors, products, services in response to their customers' needs?
Yeah, so I think you know, they have a whole bunch of challenges on the operational side of the utility. They do a really fine job of keeping their rates low, and an excellent job of keeping rates low and remaining operationally efficient. And where I think we're more challenged as an industry is on the consumer side and engaging with that consumer. And I think there are a lot of great examples of how they've reached out, and whether I'm a Southern Company customer and they have engaged me around how they can provide me with a different type of thermostat and engage me in the energy efficiency elements that they have. I think a lot of that is continuing to go forward with utilities, but it's still not necessarily the natural place for them to be.
So what are the biggest challenges? As the theme of this whole event is around the digital world. So what are some of the biggest challenges you see within the utilities in making this transition?
I think a lot of it's around the technology and being able to take the technology and have the right people, processes, in order to make the technology valuable for the end user and for the utilities themselves. It's that implementation of the technology that's probably one of the biggest challenges.
So dig more in on the people piece of things. What does that mean for the workforce of the future of the utility?
Yeah, well, that's a big question. I mean, that whole workforce has to be either retrained or brought in new. And I think one of the challenges as an industry is bringing young people into the industry and making this industry look new, young, and exciting so that we have the top talent in the industry. And, if we think about where we sit in the economy, it really is an exciting place to be. We are the foundation of the economy. We should be the best at applying technologies that allow that system to work and to support our entire economy over time. And so I would like to think there are ways that we can engage the best and brightest to come and join us. But at the same time, I think we also have to think about the workforce that we have and how can they best be utilized in order to implement those technologies.
As a technology company, how do you feel your recruitment efforts have been? Or do you feel like you're attracting the right type of talent?
That is something we talk about all the time. We have specific outreach to college. We're based in Atlanta, so Georgia Tech, Clemson, Auburn. I can't get my alma mater, Texas A&M, on the list, and I had to bring that out just because we're in Austin. But it is something that we really engage with. We have staff that are always recruiting out of those schools. It's very competitive. I mean, just bringing engineers, electrical engineers particularly, out of universities right now it's challenging. There's no shortage of jobs.
Well, let's switch gears a little bit. And one thing I have not heard you mention as a barrier is policy or regulatory issues.
It's too easy.
Yeah.
That's always easy.
Okay.
We can always say that regulatory is a barrier, and it can be, but I don't think it has to be the primary barrier. It is one where we need to get alignment. We need alignment between the regulatory and the technology and all the stakeholders that are involved in the ecosystem to really deliver that end case value. One of the ways I like to think about it is what we really need is sustainability. And we need sustainability not just from the green aspect of sustainability, but we need our utilities to have sustainable business models. And we need a regulatory construct that is sustainable long term, because if we don't have sustainability, then the thing that holds up our economy becomes fragile, and that is what we do not want to have happen.
So I want to go back to something you mentioned about sort of breaking down the barriers between the technology folks, the regulatory folks, working across. How do we become less siloed as an industry and within particular companies?
Oh, wow. If I could answer that one, I'd start my own consulting firm. I think And
is there anything unique in the energy industry, or is it just a problem that any industry is going to face and we have to deal with it in the same way?
I'm sure there's a huge element of it's the same in a lot of different industries. I think we're somewhat unique in that because we haven't engaged that end consumer and we have this regulatory framework that we have to work under, I think that builds in some natural siloing of the technology and the people and the processes in a way that makes it harder to break those barriers down. I think we've got a number of highly qualified CEOs that are great examples of breaking those barriers down, but I think it really takes leadership at that executive utility level to see those barriers and be willing to attack them in order to get some of that friction in the system removed.
Mm-hmm. And expanding on that thought further, so breaking down the silos or whether or not your company is highly siloed or not is sort of part of the culture. So let's extend the culture conversation further. As we move into a more digital world in the utility industry, what does that mean for the culture of the utility sector?
Yeah, I think every organization has a culture, and moving a culture is a very difficult challenge. And I think if you think about us as an industry, we have a culture. And in order to move that, it's going to take a long time. And I think we need organizations like the one you lead and this organization that push the boundaries of what can we do, what should we be doing, what is right for all the stakeholders in the industry. And we need to bring along that regulatory, the regulators. We need to bring along the utilities, whether they're munis, co-ops, IOUs, as an industry, we've got to find a way to push that cultural barrier, because otherwise it just stays status quo, and then we're going to end up getting disintermediated by some third party we can't see on the horizon.
Mm-hmm. So your company works globally. So are there any experiences I meant to say when I introduced Gary, we really got to know each other actually on a trip to Australia a couple of years ago. My organization takes a group of energy industry executives abroad every year for a week to really dig deep on what's going on to bring back the lessons to the US. So any particular lessons from Australia or other markets that you're working in that you think we should be thinking about here in the US?
Well, I think there's a lot of great examples, and I encourage any of you to take advantage either when you're traveling or with SEPA in order to understand where the industry is evolving in other parts of the world. Australia was very interesting in that they have a lot more distributed energy resources coming on and are trying to figure out how to do that, while at the same time they have put in it's not unlike Texas construct as far as how they are disaggregated the value chain. And I think that's created some conflict over there that I don't think we've seen here. And I think it's a little early to say whether it's good or bad, but they have their retailers and they have their GenCos and they have their distribution companies. They are all separated. And then you bring in on top of that some of the third-party players, and they've got a pretty complex system. So I think it's a good to watch. I don't know that we need to duplicate that though.
Yeah. Any other particular countries you think are interesting?
We had a great time. We were it wasn't Belgium, but yeah, it was in Belgium. They had a great outreach, I felt like, to their end consumers by being able to engage them and provide them with really distributed energy resources on the utilities dollar effectively. And they were doing some things that I don't think our regulatory structure for the most part, there's a few examples, but we don't really see the utilities being able to get involved directly with a solar implementation on a house, or being able to do the settlement of EVs here yet. I mean, they were trying to do some of those things in an interesting way, but I think they had a long way to go.
Well, on that point, share some thoughts on how, as a major vendor to the utility industry, what are ways that the vendor community can be supporting the utility industry in its efforts to do things differently? Because often that is very hard. So how could we help a more effective partnership between the utilities and their vendors to drive change forward? Yeah,
I think it's that stakeholder involvement, and I think the earlier you can get vendors, and you don't have to pick one, just get vendors involved early so that you understand what the technology capabilities are and how they can best be implemented. And there's lots of great examples of how that's done in the industry. The place that we see the most struggle is when a utility might be reluctant for whatever reason to get engaged with a vendor before the process gets going. And then they ultimately end up with surprises in the project that they probably could have worked out if they'd been able to have a little bit more early engagement with the vendor to make sure they were applying the technology as it's best designed and not maybe as they absolutely desire in their mind's eye, but sit there and say, okay, what's capable and what really delivers the value is a great way to think about it.
Great. Well, we are going to wrap up. So my last question for you is, if you had a magic wand, what would be the one thing you would do to change with the wave of your wand in order to expedite the transition to a fully digital world for the utility industry?
I think that magic wand would need to achieve some alignment between all the stakeholders, be it the shareholders of the utility, or the consumers, or the regulators, as well as the vendor community. All the stakeholders getting in alignment to where that the friction's out of the system in a way that allows us to move forward in that I'm going to use my sustainability, both a green, sustainable, and an economically viable sustainability for the business models that utilities exist as they exist today.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Gary. Great way to kick things off. Please
Thank
join
you.
me in thanking Gary.